It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7.
Well, hello, greetings. Another episode of Islands at War with myself, Keith Vangeli, and also with
Nick Lahire. Morning, Keith.
Morning, Nick. And a bit of a departure for us, Nick. We're going to have a little bit more Jersey content.
Yeah, I had quite a lot of feedback from people saying, hey, what about us in Jersey? And also from other people who just wanted some Jersey content as well, because obviously things were different between the islands and there were different events that went on. So I thought, why not? I know a bit about Jersey stuff that went on, and I can certainly research anything else that I think might be of interest. So, yeah, we've got some stuff in today.
Yeah, we got a little bit in today, and I think perhaps maybe somewhere like January we could do a sort of a catch-up, do a Jersey-centric programme that would take us from the raid in June 40 to end of 41. We can do a condensed programme, bring Jersey listeners up to date.
Yeah, indeed. But we will certainly, this is the September 41 episode, so we will be keeping Jersey in the programme as well. So you'll be getting almost equal billing, I would imagine, or maybe sometimes even a bit more than some of the Guernsey stuff.
Right. Well, I instantly will go to Jersey, and I see a Jersey name. Vibert, an escape?
Indeed. Possibly, as far as I can tell, the only one that went directly from Jersey to the UK. More amazingly, he did it in a boat that was 8.5 foot long. That's 2.6 metres. If you want to think about what 8.5 feet looks like, well, a Fiat 500, that's 11 foot 9. That's a fairly small car, 3.6 metres. So, you know, he was in a very small boat, which was called Ragamuffin. It wasn't his first attempt. He had attempted before and got a fair distance, overnighted on some rocks, and then gone back because things weren't going well. On this occasion, he carried on going. I really can't understand how he made it, to be fair.
Can I ask, do we know where, geographically, what point on Jersey that he actually left?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, actually. It will be in the book.
Yes, so this is Nick's forthcoming book about escapes.
I can't remember off the top of my head where it was.
Now, the reason I ask, of course, is that for the listeners that may not be too familiar with the geography of the Channel Islands, as Jersey is further away from the UK mainland and Guernsey. It's also there are a lot of reefs around there as well. But of course, he would have known this. But this is quite a daunting escapade, and to consider that he tried it once, he was a formidable character, I would think.
He was determined. So on this occasion, he'd managed to hide the boat until the 21st of September 41, and he decided that conditions were right for him to make a successful getaway. So, unfortunately for him, he hadn't made much progress when he came across a couple of German E-boats who, unsurprisingly, given the fact that it was dark and he was in a very tiny boat, passed about 100 yards away from him without seeing him. Unfortunately, one side effect of that was he ended up with a lot of water from their wake.
Yes.
In
better than being fired upon, though.
In the boats, indeed. Although he was obviously at risk of being run down by these things. Now, he had to bail the boat out. Unfortunately, it meant all of his food became inedible. But he carried on rowing and waited until he was 4 miles out to sea before he started the engine. He had 2 engines with him, 2 very small engines. He'd also, unfortunately, underestimated the amount of water that he needed to take with him and drank it all on the first night. At dawn the next morning, he found he was 15 miles to the west of Guernsey.
Yes.
In other words, you're going the wrong way.
Yeah,
the tides had unfortunately been stronger than he estimated, and he had been pushed 15 miles off the west coast of Guernsey, so basically heading out into the Atlantic. But he wasn't perturbed by this. He had a bit of an accident while trying to fill up one of the engines, and it just wouldn't work. And he was trying to fill it up with petrol. went to change the engine, dropped the spare engine over the side.
Oh,
But at this point, you're thinking, well, what the heck's going to happen to him now? Surely he's doomed. Undeterred, he carried on rowing for two more days.
with no water.
With no water,
food.
no food, and carried on rowing in the general direction of England. Now, by this point, he was probably about 100 miles away from the coast of England. So you're probably thinking this isn't going to end well. Fortunately, he was snatching just a few hours sleep here and there as well, because he obviously couldn't stop rowing for too long because he'd be drifting.
Drift back, yeah.
Indeed. Fortunately, he was spotted by a chap called Lieutenant Commander Frederick Thornton on HMS Brocklesby, and they rescued him basically in the nick of time. If they hadn't picked him up, then he would undoubtedly have drowned at sea, and he was taken to Plymouth. Later went on to become a pilot in the RAF.
Oh, I'm blowed. Now that's incredible. Just getting to to Plymouth.
Yeah,
It's fantastic. And do we know anything about his flying career?
he flew.
Not yet.
He flew well.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, he flew Wellingtons, but I'll elaborate more on that in the book. Well, I've already written the chapter to do with that, but I'll save that for people who want to read it in the book. One thing I will say is when he got to Plymouth, there was a bit of suspicion about who he was.
Of course,
naturally, this was the case. People had to prove who they were. He was very lucky. There was another Jerseyman in Plymouth when he was being questioned who was able to vouch for him.
Yes, this is an interesting point about suspicion falling upon people that from the Channel Islands that just happened to make the journey. It's worth mentioning that we spoke about this German soldier that possibly spoke our local language, the patois. And we've made some inquiries this end. We couldn't find any centralised list of people that evacuated. There was just too much panic. Nothing was written down. But our sort of fellow researcher, Charlie Roberts, is going to try and find out if the family of the German soldier appeared in the lists of people that came ashore into the UK at the point of evacuation. So it's possible we might be able to tie that up.
Yeah, I've got some other people pursuing various avenues of inquiry around that as well, including Jan Markey, who we may well get on the show. I had a brief exchange of messages with him, and maybe we'll get him on to talk about the role of patois, or Guernsey to be more correct, during the course of the occupation in terms of the usage of it by the locals, mostly to make sure the Germans couldn't understand what they were talking about, etc.
Yeah, well, that'd be great to get him on. I know Jan well, and I'm sure he'll give us a burst of patois for people to hear.
There'll be no stopping him.
Yeah. Now, this book, I know you're going to have some book leave coming up towards Christmas. Could we use a publication date? In fact, I know there is, because you're getting closer to it.
Well, no, there's a date for submission. I've got to submit it at the end of January. And then it will be edited and come back to me for me to look at those edits and comments and address that, and then send it back to the publishers again. So it'll be out next year, but I can't commit to an exact date as yet. Anyway,
yeah. Moving on. Okay, now still in Jersey, this wonderful rumor about a tunnel from Jersey to France.
Yeah, no, this has come out of. As I said at the top of the show, I have some knowledge about what went on in Jersey and things like that. And one of my favourite diaries from Jersey is by a chap called Philip Lesota. And I like this one because he, a bit like Ord, doesn't have a vested interest. He's just an ordinary chap in Jersey who happens to have a lot of interactions with the Germans as well as a lot of the locals as well. He's not part of the government, he's not writing his diary with a view to, well, what are people going to judge me like at the end of the war, which is, if you were part of the government, then you perhaps had one eye on that as you were doing it, or as you were potentially getting it ready for publication post-war. So I like this because he doesn't shy away from saying exactly what he thinks. He thinks something's completely ridiculous. He says so. But he also feels, quite rightly, that it's worth writing down some of these ridiculous rumours, just, because of that. So I like this little extract. Today's rumours also concern our local Nazi builder. He's starting to build a tunnel to France. He's making a tunnel at St. Wands from the beach to the airport and another at Gorey. And he's building another aerodrome at Gorey. Actually, he appears to be wholly concerned with fortifications, building pillboxes, gun emplacements. Another juicy rumour worth recording as unbelievability of it is a reprisal for the internment of Germans in Iran, all English-born people in the island to be taken to concentration camps immediately. Sadly, that one wasn't untrue, but we'll come back to that later on because we've got another reference. But he was spot on with what he said about the Germans weren't building another airfield out at Gorey or a tunnel to France. They were more busy building fortifications, including pillboxes and gun emplacements. They were building some tunnels in some of those areas, but that was to use as things like ammunition stores and air raid shelters for their personnel at some of the gun batteries, and had trenches and things like that running to them. But I just like his stuff.
Well,
so you will be hearing more from his diaries.
Yeah, well, we look
on.
forward to that. But the whole notion of a tunnel to France is sort of newsworthy anyway, because there's a lot of people in the Channel Islands believe that if we were to build a tunnel between the islands and then onto France, all our problems would be solved. I noticed that people were tweeting about the Lofoten Islands. Is it Lofoten Islands?
Yeah, something like that.
The Faroes are the tiny little islands with tunnels between them. It's not April the 1st yet. Anyway, okay, moving on then back to Guernsey. Our controlling committee was annoyed, apparently, that people were continuing the practice of converting potatoes into potato flour, and an order was issued prohibiting the sale of potato flour. The practice was considered a waste of good food. You haven't turned anything up about this. It just seems to be one of those. I've seen the notices that were issued in the Guernsey Press, but they are very, very brief. Basically, just saying, don't do it. But it's a waste of food. Yeah,
was essentially.
But it was. You'd have thought it was just the conversion of one foodstuff into another, but apparently there must have been some sort of shrinkage, and they weren't getting the full value out of it. There must have been a reason. Anyway.
Yeah.
Also, the Essential Commodities Committee sadly announced that there would be no meat ration during this weekend. So people becoming vegetarian not by choice.
This on this occasion wasn't due to not actually being able to get the meat completely. It was due to a bit of a shipping cock-up, and the meat actually turned up in Jersey. So it did arrive eventually, but not until the next week.
Okay, so Guernsey's misfortune was Jersey's gain.
Well, no, because they
sent it on later.
They sent it on, but it just didn't get here till after the weekend.
Good. And also, Dr. Simmons, Guernsey's health officer, reported that there were large quantities of carrageen moss seaweed on the beach at Grand Rock. This is on the west coast of Guernsey, and on the beaches. This could be made into excellent jelly and was said to have many health benefits. And of course, I'm thinking, well, people still were able to get on the beaches. They weren't yet mined, Nick.
No, they weren't. No, they didn't. They progressively got mined. So initially, we've mentioned in previous podcasts, places like Fermain and up on the south coast where the Germans thought commando raids would happen were mined first. But not all of the beaches were mined. Actually, it was an escape, which kind of led to more mining going on as well, but that wasn't until late 42. The reason being, in that case, because some of the people that escaped used the excuse of going on the beach to get past the German soldiers to go and collect carrageen moss, and then went and hid round the back of some rocks at Bordeaux to get picked up later by a boat. So the Germans twigged that was what had happened, and that area got mined as well. But also as generally part of the extra fortifications. Some places that you think would have been mined never actually got mined at all, which is confirmed in a number of reports to MI19, but we'll come to those later on. Dr. Simmons actually is an interesting character. The Germans didn't like him very much, mostly because he was basically telling the truth about the impact that the German occupation was having, particularly later on in the war. He wrote a report pointing out that it was quite distressing that children, despite getting older, were losing weight, not gaining weight, because of what was going on. And obviously that was having a severe impact on his health. The Germans actually tried to get him dismissed later on in the war.
Yes, talking truth onto power.
Indeed. So he will feature quite heavily later on in the war, because he does, as I say, annoy the Germans a little bit, and also carries out some interesting acts of his own.
Yeah, at the appropriate time then we'll do a profile, a sort of long profile.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He's a fascinating chap.
Pivotal person over here.
And he was quite elderly at the time he took the appointment as well, but was willing to do it for the good of the island.
Yes, just an aside, when we talk about elderly people, I was going through some of my family's papers, that my gran made in this sort of family commonplace book. She was listing all of the pets that she had and lost in the years running up to the war. And then during the period leading up to when she expected to be evacuated, she had her dog put down. Of course, it didn't need to be put down because she never evacuated in the end. But she mentions the dogs and cats being put down by a Dr. Foote. So I contacted Steve Foote, who's be doing a programme with us shortly, and said, "Did you have a vet in your family?" He said, "Yes, it was my grandfather. He was still practising when he was 93.
God,
he was the UK's oldest vet, so he would have been right in the middle of all these poor animals being euthanized just before evacuation." But anyway, right. Other items concerning civilian affairs, Nick. The Guernsey Press held a charity swimming gala at the bathing pools, and over 2,000 people attended. This is a tenth of the population in Guernsey.
Yeah, it is. By that point, it's a tenth of the population of Guernsey basically turned out to see this swimming gala.
And just for people that don't know, these are outdoor swimming pools are just across the bay from Castle Cornet on the edge of St. Peter Port.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll nip down there and take some photographs.
Yeah, that'd be good.
After actually.
Because they're unchanged, effectively, from
absolutely.
Pretty much.
Well, yeah. So aside from the wonderful new facility that they've built there for changing rooms and a cafe, but the actual pools themselves are unchanged.
You've actually turned up some pictures from...
Save for the fact that the really high diving boards that were there when I was a nipper are no longer there for health and safety reasons, because they're worried about people falling in, jumping into the pools from them, because they were quite high up. I've got some nice photos from the Guernsey Press of the time
and lists of competitors. We can tweet these out, I think.
Yeah, I can put these out. These come from my own collection of Guernsey Presses. So
one of the photographs, as people will see, of a person launching himself off one of those diving boards. A really good photograph.
Yeah, there's some great news, and for those of you with a Guernsey family connection, you may well see a relative or someone that was a family friend. You may well see their results in there, because we've got all of the results for the swimming gala. I do like the way that they use everyone. It's all very formal. That it's Mr. W.M. Manning.
Like the cricket at the time.
He was Guernsey's diving coach, and it took some quite length about some of his protégés and things like that. So I just thought that was quite an interesting article.
It is.
On another serious note from it as well, it raised quite a lot of money for charity at the time. It was £30 that was given to charity, but I did a quick calculation using the Bank of England inflation calculator. That's about £1,275 in today's money.
Yeah, very good. And in fact, the lucky numbers for the raffle have been reproduced. So if you haven't
cashed your ticket in yet, you might be in with a chance. But I found another story actually a couple of days later in the Guernsey Press, which relates to.
Oh, this is very good. Yeah,
which relates to the swimming gala and gentlemen getting in hot water rather than maybe chilly seawater. And it's a court report. And it's headed up, had a couple of cocktails. Edgar Harry Brush, 47, a labourer who lived in the Cutter in the Vale, was charged with being drunk and disorderly around 6:30 p.m. on September the 4th at Glatony Esplanade. The defendant said he had been to the swimming gala and had a couple of cocktails. A thing I haven't had this year, and they affected me quickly, he added. I expect cocktails are useful for diving purposes, observed the inspector, who had said that the defendant had created a scene in a hotel. A fine of 2 shillings 6 was imposed. I imagine that was probably the Channel Island Hotel, or one of those.
Yes, I expect the inspector was Langmead as well.
Yeah, quite possibly Langmead at that point. Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of the court cases are brought by the inspector of police when you read the court reports. But I was a bit surprised about the fact he was able to have cocktails because spirits were not supposed to be sold to the...
One can only imagine it's hardly going to be something like I don't really know too many cocktails, but I don't know, a mixture of carrageen, moss and petrol, perhaps.
Who knows? But I just thought that was a nice little light-hearted story to go along with that.
2 and 6, that's probably as much as he paid for the cocktails. Right, German soldiers stationed on Guernsey have been preparing for music and entertainment competitions at the Regal, which was known as the Odeon. The public would be the adjudicators, which it was suggested that people attending the concerts will see another side to the German soldier. So this is what, like Stars in Your Eyes or something, with or Strictly Come Dancing or something like that.
This is another propaganda exercise, basically, and you can see that from reading the article in the newspaper. It's clearly just been placed there by the Germans to try and ingratiate themselves.
Well, it said hundreds of islanders attended.
Well, quite possibly. I mean, more out of curiosity, I would imagine, rather than
jeering rather than cheering.
And to be honest, the German censor will have looked at that article, so it might not have said there might not have been quite as many people. But it on a serious note, it was, the troops obviously had to entertain themselves while they were here. But this will have been a massive propaganda exercise. The article talks about the troops will greatly welcome the opportunity of performing and holding their competitions in public.
Yeah.
It says, in the first place, the men, in their spare time, take every opportunity of assiduously exercising their talents and of practicing the liberal and cultural arts. See, they're trying to make themselves sound like they're a really nice bunch of folks.
I can only imagine that the Germans themselves wrote this.
Yeah, they did.
Review.
There would have been. This was on the second page of the Guernsey Press. It would have been. It was part of the German propaganda, without a doubt. And you can tell from the wording of it as well. In the second place, the opportunity of being able to appear before a large audience to give their entertainment will naturally be an incentive for them to do their very best.
I mean, it's not something out of, what was that program that used to be on? I never used to watch it. The comedy LOLO, is it called LOLO? About the French.
Yeah.
Yes, it sounds like something like that, out of that. And of course, well, do we know? Were there sketches in English or were?
I don't know, to be honest. I will look further into that. But again, you can tell it's propaganda because it says the local civilian public will have the opportunity of becoming acquainted with another side of the German soldier. They will see that the troops that have already been on the island for over a year and now form an integral part of the island community are men who, under their grey tunics, have retained the healthy and youthful spirit of song, music and cheerfulness.
Yes, one can only imagine. I think, if anything, it was on the top of the page here, it says admission free. So,
yeah, funny that. It's the only way they're going to get anybody to go and watch.
Oh, maybe we can tweet that out as well.
I can put that out as well
excellent.
When we put the podcast out.
Okay, moving on. On the 9th of September 1941, dense clouds of smoke overshadowed the northern part of St. Peter Port. Residents of the Boet area, this is a suburb on the northern part of St. Peter Port, reported hearing a number of explosions. It was later explained that the gas light company, because people did have gas mantles, there was one in this very room and in my house as well. It was all gas at that time. Were conducting experiments with 150 gallons of tar. They were trying to boil off the light oil and produce a type of bitumen for repairing the roads, which of course would have had a bit of a pounding from German military vehicles and such. However, the oil ignited and streamed across the yard, setting 2 lorries alight. It was quite a quite an episode. People seeing this black smoke, and must have been wondering what was going on.
Yeah, and from memory, I think they were they had the actual gasworks was down there as well. So
yeah,
if it had gone in a different direction, things might have ended with a very big bang. That said, of course, there was a shortage of gas, so it might not have been quite such a big bang. But again, this goes back to, it's just another instance of being forced to experiment with things.
Necessity being the mother of invention.
Exactly, being forced to try other things because you just simply don't have, the supplies of things that you do need. And, there were also experiments at the same time, around this time going on with trying to convert vehicles to run on a form of gas using some very complicated looking kit that they add to
very Heath Robinson.
Yeah, add to the back of the bus. It looks like a big boiler, to be honest. That added to the back of a bus to try and be able to use that, and I don't think those were overly successful either. But yeah, I can imagine if you lived in St. Peter Port and you were looking at the Boat and you heard the explosions and saw all that smoke, you might have thought that the gasworks had been bombed.
Yes, or a military accident of some sort. But yeah, well, so we don't really know if the experiment eventually was successful. I suppose they just sort of abandoned it at that point.
I think I'd probably have given up. I don't know. I mean, I've read plenty of accounts that the roads were actually in reasonable shape come liberation, but I'm guessing that.
But less and less usage, of course, as time goes by. Lack of petrol, etc.
Hardly any civilian vehicles, etc.
Yeah. Another thing that caught my eye, Nick, was reported that a customs officer, and we'll touch on that in a second, going through a woman's luggage, found 2 bottles of whiskey in a trunk, after the woman had informed him that the contents were only clothing. And when questioned, the lady explained, yes, those are my husband's nightcaps, which was a nice little story. But I thought to myself, why would we have customs officers? There's no tourism, etc. But of course, as you explained, or you will explain, there was fears of smuggling by French civilians, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of possibilities. So a couple of episodes ago, I think it might be in the August 41, actually, we talked about the whole thing about a captain of a ship and some of the crew being charged with smuggling in saccharin tablets, and they got taken to court because they were caught by customs officers. So you could have people trying to smuggle things from France that way. You also did have movement of people because people were being sent here to work by the Germans. So this lady could have been sent from France or come from via Jersey to come and work here in Guernsey. So that's a possibility as well. So they did have these customs officers. They were German customs officers that would search people. So and given the control on spirits, that they would have been not allowed to have that.
Yes, it's interesting when she said that those are my husband's nightcaps. It's almost as she was returning to Guernsey and she brought these for her husband, but that's all conjecture.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. Okay, well, we move on to sort of some matters military here. One of the diarists that we feature, J.C. Sovery, recorded a lot of either recorded the activity, military activity, or rumours of military activity. So he refers to September the 8th and the 17th, machine gun fire and bombs and flares. And Ord also discusses this. And I looked up some of the German deaths, and there were 2 sailors killed or died early in September, the 8th, which fits the dates. Ord describes an attack on barges that were used for bringing in materials like concrete, etc. Fuller had been, and he was talking to a florist, Fuller, and Fuller said that he had orders for 18 wreaths following attacks on some barges. Now, 18 wreaths doesn't mean 18 dead. It could mean several wreaths for the same people. Yeah. Fuller reports, so this is the florist reporting, that he'd been summoned aboard the largest barge and said he counted over 60 bullet holes. This vessel had most of the casualties, having been rather crowded. The captain and chief engineer were supposedly killed. Well, I couldn't see their deaths being related in the German war dead here. And then some sailors who jumped in the sea may have drowned. This date reconciles with savoury. So there's some sort of cross confirmation here of these attacks, and there was some later in the month, the 23rd of September, and I think, Nick, was there here a loss of a Spitfire, Sergeant G.A. Painting, 30th September, 118 Squadron Spitfire, east of Alderney. Is this ramrod raised to harass? Is ramrod an operation, or is it a type of plane?
It's just the description that I gave to those types of raids. So that was sort of light bomber type raids, and they'd be escorted by Spitfires, etc. You'd have a variety of aircraft that were used for these types of operations. And this
would have been operations over the Channel Islands, or maybe coming back from France?
No, just in general around the French coast. So you get different things that happen here. So there's a variety of aircraft involved. You're not seeing huge 4-engine bombers at this point attacking anything around here. What you're looking at is things like fighter aircraft, Hurricanes, Spitfires predominantly. You're getting the odd Blenheim or Beaufort as well attacking targets here. Now, quite often these are just targets of opportunity, so they're either just out on a sortie where they're just flying around the area between France, quite often down as far as Brest. So the bombers might have targets on the French coast or shipping around the French coast. Other aircraft might be just looking to, is there shipping we can disrupt by just going along and machine gunning them, which is, obviously the case here. That gentleman that you mentioned was flying a Spitfire 5B, but they would just basically look to harass shipping, which is why partly we did have problems with rations from time to time, because things got sunk. They can't, you're flying along in your aircraft, you can't tell whether that's all food supplies just for civilians on that barge. You can't tell what they've got on board. So that was the sort of thing. But you did get attacks on the island, because they may be coming back, may have got a bit lost, or just coming back this way. It wasn't uncommon for them to come back this way because they might find a target of opportunity, and that's where you get these reports of a lone aircraft machine gunning Germans along a beach or something like that.
Yes, in fact my father had a friend who grew up in Jersey during the war, and he said that he was out in the open, and he remembers being picked up swiftly by a German soldier and rushed under cover as a British plane came down firing at the Germans, and so he feels his life was actually saved by a German soldier stationed on Germany.
Yeah, and it's worth noting a couple of things about this report. I had a look at my book of Channel Islands shipping during the occupation, and these must have been barges being towed, I would imagine, because they're not mentioned as any of the regular visitors to any of the Channel Islands, and I can't find a report of an incident of any of those being damaged during the course of things. So these must have just been, I would imagine, barges that were being towed.
Well, they were bringing concrete, cement over on these barges, weren't they? That was one of the big sort of commodities that was being brought in around this time.
Yeah. So as I say, it's not one of the ones named in the books, and I can't find any other reference to it.
Quite a few of the diarists do sort of, as I say, cross confirm.
Yeah, but the only problem with that is, did they see it, or are they relying on someone else? Like all of the rumours that go around, they turn up in a lot of the diaries.
Yes, I tend to work with the reports of the German war dead. I mean, if they're being reported absolutely dead, and you work backwards, for example. Ord writes on the 26th, another flying plane swooped down on troops on the north coast. And this ties in with the dates for the death of poor, here we got Gunther Nitz, Sergeant, died on the 26th. So...
Except
if we take those records and move backwards to the rumour, then you can almost substantiate the rumour.
Yeah. No, that was exactly my point. Don't just rely on the fact that it's in a lot of diaries, because there's lots of stuff that appears in lots of the diaries because it was rumoured going around the island, which are, when you actually check for evidence of it, were either a slightly different event to what the diarists have recorded because the rumours changed as it's been passed around versus what the actual event was. And quite often it is a massively inflated number of Germans were killed.
Yes, well, that was particularly something that appeared in Duran's accounts of the war. But like the gentleman in Jersey, we had people that were sceptical and damped down a lot of rumours.
Ord himself is sceptical a lot of the time.
Okay, I see here that Ord, who of course read German, records that he had seen it in a German magazine, yet another account of a film, The Battle for Guernsey, whereby the island was invaded from the sea, which of course is completely untrue. And apparently the island authorities had implored the British Army to leave, with islanders who were in a state of panic would only leave their homes when kindly Germans invited them to do so. Ord said the film looked impressive when shown until it was seen by troops that were actually drafted to Guernsey, and they could judge for themselves the authenticity of the film. So there had been a film shot in Nick. This wasn't the same one.
No, the one shot in Herm was a propaganda film, which they were going to use to as part of their we're coming to England, and there's also a theory that they were going to pretend that was the Isle of Wight that they were. Yeah. But that was filmed back in August 1940. That was much earlier. Now, this one apparently features street fighting, the island authorities asking the British to leave, and it's a very bloody battle and stuff like that. Now, I've looked everywhere to try and see this, see if I can find a copy of this film or even some stills from it. I can't find anything at the moment, and I can't find anybody that does know about it. However, I have got a couple of contacts in Germany who I've been in touch with to see if if there is anything.
Even if we could pick up the magazine itself, that would be interesting.
But I've literally drawn a blank. I've looked in the Bundesarchive. I've looked all over the shop. So unfortunately, I can't find anything. Now, interesting, of course. Operation Green Arrow was the original plan to invade the Channel Islands, and that was going to be by boat. So it's kind of like they've made a movie about here's what might have happened.
Yeah. Alternative history.
It's a bit odd. That we're in September 41, so a year and a bit after they did arrive, and they appear to have made a movie of, well, this is what might have happened.
And of course,
but we're going to present it as being fact.
Yeah, and this is before landing craft had really been developed. Right?
Because, there wasn't landing craft. It would have been barges. This is why we've got barges coming to the Channel Islands. They would have been used barges, which, frankly, a lot of them were totally unsuitable. And they didn't even have enough barges to be invading the UK. And just think of the logistics. How the hell do you get the stuff off? If you're assaulting somewhere and you're trying to get troops off the barges onto the beach, it's just crazy. But yeah, they seem to have made a film of, well, this is what we thought was going to happen, but presenting it as what actually happened. So no, I'm not surprised that the garrison were like,
bread and circuses.
What the heck?
Okay, and Ord, this one tickled me a little bit. Ord, who was a German speaker, of course, records an account of going to a local bookshop and discussing books with the owner, and then getting into conversation with a German officer. The German officer looking to buy classics which he could pick up, and he gets into conversation with Ord and says to Ord about the bookshop, if he was able to buy books in German, who would he like to buy a book of? And Ord happens to say that and I think these are more of books to do with religion. This is what Ord used to read, theocratic books of theology. And he says to the German officer, I would like to buy a certain book by Hermann Gunkel. And the German officer said, that's my dad.
Yeah.
All the people to get into conversation with. And I think Ord went on to have quite a good relationship with some of the German officers that were Anglophile for a start. But
he actually talks about specific shops in Germany that he'd like to go to in Leipzig to go and purchase books. So this German had mentioned to Ord that he was on leave and he'd been passing through Leipzig recently. So, yeah, but this German was quite astonished, I think.
Well, anybody would be, I think. Yeah. And then I like this one again. Another rumor from description from Maud that apparently there was a rumor abroad. It's unbelievable to this, that the Royal Navy was going to come to the island this weekend, so a weekend in September, to take away men of military age, as if the Germans were going to just let the British come and take people away. I mean, it's most bizarre. And the men needed to be ready to leave when the signal is given. I mean, this is just absurd.
Yeah. Now, there's a number of aspects of this that I want to talk about. So, there is a suspicion that this rumour was started by the Germans.
Yes.
Quite why the Germans would have started it, I'm not really sure. However, I'm more inclined to believe that it possibly was started by the Germans, because the same rumour is doing the rounds in Jersey.
Yeah, coordinated to flush out some sort of...
And at exactly the same time. So I find it a little bit difficult to think that, the locals would have come up with the same rumour in two different islands, when travel between the islands was pretty rare. You had to get a permit. So, for that rumour. However, if it was generated by the locals, there's a very good reason, and we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about Philip Lasota's book, and he was talking about Iran. So this dates back to August 1941. So, we're talking July, really. 41 is where it starts. So Persia, which is now Iran, was neutral, but it also happened to be Germany's largest trading partner in the world. For obvious reasons, they had plenty of things that they would be wanting to
oil and oil-based products
get their hands on. Yeah, exactly, for starters. Now, the British were in Iraq, and on the other side were the Soviets on the northern border. So the British were to the west, and the Soviets were to the north. There'd been an anti-British coup by Nazi sympathisers as well. That's why the British had gone into Iraq. So the British and the Soviets were worried about the large expat German community in Iran. It did have a fairly sizable population of expats. As you would imagine, if it's a massive trading partner of yours, you're going to have a community that's built up there. And the British and the Soviets were worried about subversive activities. So on the 19th of July 41, there was a joint demand by the British and Soviets for Persia to expel all German citizens, which was rejected, and they made a renewed effort for this on the 16th of August 41. This time coordinated with the Americans at a conference in 41. So the Americans hadn't joined the war yet, but they were involved in this conference. Persia eventually agreed to the demand, but by the time they were going to do anything about it, events had taken another turn, and the Soviets had decided to invade Persia. You're probably wondering, what the hell's this got to do with Guernsey and Jersey? We're getting there. So German men of fighting age, 18 to 45, were rounded up, most preferring British to Soviet control, strangely enough.
So, sorry, can I just interject here? So, Persia, Iran, and of course it wasn't a theocratic state like it is now, they were actually invaded from the north, which is Russia. So Russian troops entered Iran, and the British came in from Iraq.
Yep. They didn't. The Soviets didn't wait for the Persians to actually have the opportunity of expelling these people. A few of the Germans ended up in Soviet hands and were promptly shipped off to Siberia. The British took a slightly different view, separated out Jewish Germans who could stay in Persia.
Yeah, but did Iran didn't fight?
No.
They just capitulated.
They didn't have any choice. The remaining men were sent to India for internment, and then some on to Australia. But women and children were allowed to go back to Germany. Hitler, unsurprisingly, not very impressed. ordered 10-for-1 deportations, and he was like, now let me see, where I've got a lot of British people.
Yes.
So basically, anybody born in Great Britain, so anybody not born in the Channel Islands, he wanted 10-for-1 of those deported.
Okay, so British residents living on
the Channel Islands,
anywhere in the Channel Islands. Yeah.
Yep. He was. I want 10-for-1 deportations. So there weren't actually enough when the authorities did a count, because you were going to end up with about 8,000 people that they wanted to deport. The order, however, ended up getting delayed because he got distracted. So the government had been warned here and in Jersey that compile these lists, and the lists were compiled. So this is how people were getting worried about the fact that there were going to be deportations. But you know how short his attention span was. He got distracted by issuing his order to fortify the islands, completely forgot about, and the October 41 order to fortify the islands also mentioned this deportation, but said, do not do anything, await further instructions. Now, fortunately nothing happened until September 42, but unfortunately it was a result of a Swiss attempt to get an exchange of injured soldiers on civilians. That reminded Hitler, hang on a minute, what happened to the deportations I was going to do? It didn't happen. Apparently he was furious that it hadn't happened, even though his order had actually said, hang on a minute, we'll send you further instructions later, and he just lost track of it.
And of course, so this was the genesis of the idea, which eventually saw people being deported from all of the Channel Islands. Well, from predominantly Guernsey and Jersey, of course, but they did touch on Sark, and at the right time we'll get there.
Yeah,
and these deportations did, of course, happen in 42 and of course in 43.
Yeah.
So this is where it all really starts.
This is all
from the situation
where it started,
and in Iran. So the question arises, Nick, which is, I suppose, a rhetoric question. If this had not arisen in Iran when it did, would the deportations, as we now know them, actually have ever taken place?
Possibly not, unless he found another reason to do
and of course, and we will get there in due course. But it raises again the question that were the deportations ultimately a good thing in terms of getting mouths and stomachs off the island at a latter point in the war? And of course we will find out that people in the camps were actually sending food back to the Channel Islands.
Yeah, and we'll deal with all that when we get there.
Big subject. But this is where it starts.
Yeah, but this is where it starts, and this is why this rumour, is either started by the Germans just to
see, do you think?
Wind up the local population potentially, who knows? Or it was started by the local population, as a lot of these rumours did, in hope that that a particular event is going to occur.
Yeah.
So they're hoping that the Royal Navy will come and take these men away, so that they don't get deported.
But it does sound like a coordinated German ruse, just to see.
It does a little bit. I've not seen a definitive opinion anywhere on that, but there are a number of people that record that they think that is potentially a rumour that was started by the Germans. But as with all rumours, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of where it kicked off from.
Yeah, well, as I say, we when we get to the point where the deportations happened, we will look back on this as being where it all started. Now, you turned up something interesting in a West Country newspaper, which is presumably from September 41. You picked this up?
It is, yeah, 20th September 41, the Bath Weekly, Chronicle and Herald. So I was doing some digging just to see what was in the English newspapers about the Channel Islands. So I subscribe to the British Newspaper Archive, which can lead down a lot of rabbit holes, but it is very searchable, so you can go and find articles. It takes a bit of a while to get used to how to use search terms which don't turn up hundreds and hundreds of pages of Guernsey cattle for sale and things like that. But once you've got the gist of it, it does turn up.
Once you got your eye in,
yeah, it does turn up some useful news. So This comes from the Bath Weekly Chronicle and Herald of the 20th of September. And it's an article which, again, is about rumours. So it's headlined, Atrocity Rumours Denied, Channel Island Exiles Reassured at Bath. And it's a whole article about rumours of German atrocities in the Channel Islands, which were emphatically denied by Lord Justice Du Parc at the Pump Room in Bath on Saturday. Now, Du Parc's an interesting chap. He was a lawyer, came from a St Helier family, and he ended up basically being in charge of chairman of the Channel Islands Refugee Committee in London, which was looking after the interests of refugees. And he went to Bath and gave this speech because there were a number of alarming rumours that had been spread about some of the well-known people in the islands. And he said, look, basically these are almost certainly untrue. Stories of confinement and concentration camps or shooting were without foundation. Now, one thing he did get wrong, well, perhaps not wrong, but perhaps underestimated the extent of the food problem. He reassured them that the islanders were not starving, which arguably, okay, you weren't a lot of people starving to death, but there were people certainly dying because they didn't have sufficient food. But there were a lot of people who were suffering very, very badly from the lack of it. He makes some interesting observations. I don't believe that atrocities have been committed in the islands and that our people there are starving. I think in many respects life goes on in the old way, but in truth nothing could be the same with Germans goose-stepping around our British streets. And there's some more stuff in the article, mostly talking about prominent people that were invited to come to this event and the fact that the mayor of Bath was there and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite an interesting read. I can't share that because it's copyrighted. So
yeah. But it just shows that our plight here, or the plight of the islanders, were very much on people's minds in the UK.
Very much so. So anyway, Keith, I've heard a rumour you've got a new podcast coming up.
Yes, not occupation related, obviously, but from time to time, where events overlap, we will be including those. It'll be in association with my Guernsey walking tours and my Thinking on Your Feet arts collective. There's a lot of subjects over here that would fall outside of the remit of this podcast. Like yourself, I'm doing some work with Jim Delbridge over on BBC Radio Guernsey and Radio Jersey, and it's prompted me to look at a lot of shared experiences. We're working on the English Civil War, for example, how that was handled or how that affected the islands. It was a shared experience. It was the same, and yet it was different. And so we'll also be looking at items on the island that came out of Roman times, pre-Roman times. One of the things that we'll be doing in January is looking at Loop Tower 14. I'll be leading a tour on the 26th of January. That will go from Ecar Headland, and we'll look at World War II sites, but also taking in the Napoleonic and pre-Napoleonic era fortifications there, and including a visit to Loop Tower 14 that has been renovated. So there'll be a walk and tours and a podcast that will accompany this. And with the podcast about Loop Tower 14 is my very own brother was very instrumental in the renovation of that building. So we'll be looking at the history of the tower from the point of it was built, its decline, its role in World War II, as it happens.
Yeah, indeed.
But also the renovation that's taken place over the last 6 or 7 years, slightly as everything was interrupted by COVID. And my brother will be in to talk about that. So if anyone is on Guernsey and interested in coming on a walk that will cover a little bit of ground, it will be quite a steep decline walk round in places, but if you're fit and healthy and you're interested, that'll take place. You can get hold of me at keith@guernseywalkingtours.com, but I will be tweeting out some information on the podcast, so it will be a supplementary podcast to this, and it will go out fortnightly. So thanks for raising that, and I'm sure that you will come on some of the walks, and I'm sure you'll be appearing on that podcast as well.
Oh, quite possibly. I tell you what, I've had a very busy couple of weeks, but both with research, but also with other involvements in other things. But one of the things I really have enjoyed is at the moment I'm on the accreditation course guiding in Guernsey. And there's been some fantastic talks on that from some of the existing tour guides. We had Tim Osborne, who was on the last episode of the pod. He gave a great talk about the occupation this Thursday evening. We had Sue Welfare, who talked about folklore. Now, I thought I knew quite a lot about the folklore of Guernsey. I scratched the surface. She really knows her stuff.
I've just put Sue's name down on the list of potential guests.
Yeah, she'd be fantastic, actually. So really, really interesting talk about folklore. As I say, I thought I knew quite a bit about folklore, having read a number of the books, and no, I know very little about it. Sue really, really does know her stuff. Really engaging speaker as well. And then the chap the week before, oh gosh, I've forgotten his name, other than it was Phil.
Phil Martin?
He's states archaeologist, I think is his...
Oh, Phil de Jersey.
That's the man.
Yep.
That's the man.
Yeah, he'll be coming in soon, actually. To talk about archaeology in this season. Yeah,
he was really, really good talking about prehistory of the islands. And again, I thought I knew a little bit about that, but I knew a fraction of stuff. And he showed us some really interesting stuff about some of the digs that he's been involved in Herm, in Guernsey, and up in Alderney. Some really fascinating information.
And he was involved on the periphery of the Jersey coin hoard.
Okay.
There's a very, very good book about the Jersey coin hoard, and Phil appears in the book. So Phil will be a guest on the podcast very shortly. So I'm so proud of the history of our islands and the way it's been documented over the centuries.
Yeah, I mean, there's
over
so many
millennia, in fact.
There's so many different aspects of it, and the fact that the folklore has been documented so well, and you know, some of it it's just fascinating, and just understanding why some of those, you know, folklore things, a bit like the rumours that came up during the occupation. You know, why did some of these folklore stories...
Werewolves.
Yeah, the Varuf. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why did these things come about? Well, that was smugglers wanting not to be disturbed.
Yes, the Varuf, actually, the Germans had a resistance nest called Varuf Resistance Nest.
Exactly, yeah. And very appropriately.
Yeah, but, sorry.
But also worth mentioning that you're going to be talking to Steve Foote from Blue Warmer on the podcast here.
Yes, we're recording this on Saturday morning, Saturday the 16th. This episode will be heard on Monday week.
Yep.
And I'm recording Steve tomorrow, so that would go out. I can't do the math, but Steve will be the week following our podcast.
Yeah, we'll stick it out. Rather than having a 2-weekly schedule, we'll bung them out. So it'll be one the week after the other. Partly because Steve will be endangering your pile of books that you haven't read, your pile of shame, as some of our friends call it. Yeah. You know, because he'll be talking.
There's one in every room. There's one just over there.
Yeah, he'll be talking about some absolutely fascinating books that he's been involved in. So
yes, the books he's published essentially.
Yeah, essentially through Blue Warmer, a number of them about the occupation. So yeah, don't be warned, you might end up buying some more books. But I'm really looking forward to listening to that episode. That's going to be good.
So it'll be along the same lines as the one that Tim did, and we got a great reaction to that. Okay, so we've sort of come to the end. A quick shout out, of course, to Charlie Roberts, who continues to help us with some research,
brilliant research. Thank you very much, Charlie. Much appreciated.
Yeah, and it was great to hear from Kester, who was back on the island, and I had a long conversation with Kester. Kester, quite a fan. And I'm hoping to meet up with him in the spring when he's next back on the island. So if anyone is ever on the island for whatever reason, Nick, we're perfectly happy for them to get in touch with us. occupied@gnetradio.com. Perhaps we can show them round, or it'd be nice for us to meet up with people like-minded people.
Absolutely. I frequently get people who contact me through my website, islandfortress.com. They either use the contact form there or just drop me an email. And I've had some really fascinating Zoom calls, and also met up with some people here and been able to show them around a few areas of the island that were of particular interest to them, mostly relating to family members that were here during the occupation. Always happy to speak to people, and sometimes you find out they've got a golden nugget of information that they either show you a photograph or some documentation or just tell you about something, and it's like, hang on a minute, that makes sense. That fills in the gap between X and Y, and it's and I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, well, one of our tour guides recently, Jackie Ward, introduced me to a lady who wanted to know if I knew anything about the Marcon family over here, and it turned out that we are distant cousins. So if you're listening in Australia, Karen, I'll have some more information for you soon, and it's all part of the greater good. So, I'll be in the UK, Nick, following up on the lecture I did on Elsie Henderson and Arthur Michael. Mm-hmm. Arthur Michael was the stepfather of Desmond Mulholland, MC, who was one of our commandos. I'll be going to look at works by those artists. So I'll be meeting up with Peter Jesson, who wrote No News from Guernsey, which is an excellent book if you're interested in the background of one of our local heroes. We're rambling on. I think it's time for us to get Jim in the room.
Indeed.
Okay, well, thank you ever so much for your continued listenership and support, you people out there, and we're thoroughly enjoying this. We're going to go out now with a bit of Jim Delbridge. So it's goodbye from me, Keith, and also from Nick. Alapashoin. Bye-bye.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and family had gone.